Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. It is freezing cold in New York today, so I hope wherever you are is nice and warm and comfortable. To be honest, if I wasn't standing right in the sun, I'd probably be in a huge hoodie and maybe even a jacket. But anyway, let's start this shivery Q&A and answer some of your questions. First up, Kyle Gamblin posted in regards to the PS3 reballing conversation, and it turns out the person who did mine, who didn't actually reball my PS3, who just hit it with a heat gun, turns out Kyle had his done from that same person, and they did a good job. So I guess it's hit or miss, but I would just be wary of that seller. Maybe if you're local, because I believe he's in California, so maybe if you're local and you could save on shipping, because it costs a lot to ship PS3s because they're heavy and you really got to pack them up. Give them a try if local, but if not, I'd really like to find somebody else with a perfect reputation, which is not a hard thing to ask. I mean, I don't count negative feedback as a bad reputation. I've had I sold something broken for parts with a picture of a broken phone, and somebody left negative feedback because the touchscreen didn't work, and eBay would not remove it. So I don't look at negative feedback on places and just assume that it's a bad seller. But when I do read things like, I got my PS3 back and it never worked, took 3 months to return it. Basically all the same things that happened to me happened to a lot of other people. So I would definitely be wary of that seller reballing genius. But if anybody knows of a solid, good reballing place for PS3s or any other console, please let me know, because it is definitely something I'd like to at least have access to should I need more work done on any of those consoles. Firebrand X chimed in about the line count in different CRTs and in context of the conversation I had with Pat, who said that a lot of the CRTs were labeled as 1,000 line or 900 line, but they're all the same model. And Firebrand X said he's betting the line count difference on the same tube means the electronics that can control the electron beam itself were responsible for the difference. In other words, the tube itself wasn't capable of 1,000 lines, but could be used in cheaper configuration that used less lines. It's not like a digital display where you have a set in stone native resolution. That sounds like a perfectly good explanation to me, because there's nothing in the tube itself with lines or pixels like a flat screen. So yeah, that makes sense. Any other CRT experts listening, please let me know and see if we can confirm if that's the truth. But if that's the case, I'd certainly, at least for my own peace of mind, like to know why there was a line count difference, because you could definitely count the lines and see on certain tubes. So thanks for chiming in. The importer asked why we haven't gotten a proper optical drive emulator for the PS2 or PS2 Slim yet, and he said that loading games from the hard drive, I'm assuming with FreeMcBoot and HD Loader, doesn't offer the same compatibility as a regular disk emulator would. Well, the reason we haven't gotten an optical drive emulator yet is because there's some proprietary stuff going on with the PS2. It's not just like a basic IDE CD-ROM drive. Sony has some of their own stuff in there that no one's reverse engineered yet, and I'm not sure if people would even be able to. It might be an effort that certain people just, the people working on it might not want to have to deal with at the moment. As for HD Loader, this is something I always go back and forth on, because I have a PS2 Slim that's chipped, and it plays my backups perfectly. The laser's calibrated, I use Taiyo Yuden media, I burn at the slowest speed possible, and both discs and CDs seem to work perfect. And for games where you need to swap the discs, it works just the same. And with HD Loader, yeah, I did have to patch a few games before they would play, but the few hours I've spent with my hard drive based PS2, it either didn't work at all or it seemed to work fine. I didn't play any games that required multiple discs on it, so I actually don't even remember how that would work. But yeah, it is a different way to play it. My advice is, if you have the ability to mod a PlayStation 2 with a mod chip, which is really hard, by the way, it is so much harder than modding like a Super Nintendo, for example. If you have the ability to do that, or if you know somebody skilled enough to do that, and there are not a lot of people out there that can, maybe give it a try. It's certainly easy to use discs. But if you don't have those hacking skills, those modding skills, and you do already have a fat PlayStation 2, you could just get a hard drive and all you need is access to someone else's modded PlayStation 2. That way you can get FreeMcBoot on the memory card itself. And other than that, it's a little bit of patience to go through. It's not as easy as dumping a ROM set on an SD card, but it is pretty easy, all things considered. And I like the SATA-based network adapters. They're third party, they seem to work fine, but you can get them on eBay fairly cheap, and then you could just get an SSD. So rather than use a big spinning loud IDE hard drive, I like to either use an SSD or an SD card to SSD adapter. So, you plug that into the network adapter and then that in the PlayStation 2, and it adds pretty much zero weight to it. It's easy to pull the SD card out and put it right in your computer, and it works exactly as if it was a hard drive. So, as long as you have some patience and some IT-ish skills, you should be able to get that working. And while you're right, it's not as easy as just a regular optical drive emulator, and there are compatibility issues. Compared to the options, I find it really easy. And I keep going back and forth on which one I want to stick with. Do I want to keep, my fat PS2 with the SATA drive in there? Do I want to just have the nice convenience of a PS2 Slim that plays all my discs? I don't really know. I'm not really sure if I'll ever really decide on one or the other. But I do know that if there was some kind of optical drive emulator, I would rather have the Slim and just use everything through that. The very few shortcomings of PS1 games on a PS2 don't bother me at all. They don't affect what I personally do. So that would be my choice if I could have the perfect PS2. It would be a Slim chipped with an optical drive emulator. But obviously, if there's any progress in any of that stuff, I'll keep everybody in the loop. Ken Wayne had an interesting question. He's got a full RGB and component setup going into an Extron Crosspoint into a PVM, and he wants to utilize one of the Crosspoint's outputs to convert the signal to RF so that he could use it on one of those RF-only TVs. And that's neat. I could imagine a whole bunch of reasons why you would want to do that. And it sounds like fun. But the only pause that I have about something like that would be cost. Because I imagine that Extron probably makes a few devices that can convert between any kind of signal all the way down to composite video. And then you could probably use like a VCR to go from composite to RF, and that would really take care of it. You might get lag out of that conversion device, and I've seen VCRs, or I don't know about VCRs, but I've definitely seen DVD recorders add lag because it processes the output. So if you're just using this as a visual cue, cool. Maybe it's an art project, or you just want to have your RGB monitor on top of one of those old wood grain TVs that was like a piece of furniture. That's neat, and that would be fine. But you might end up spending a couple $100 on the right converter, and then finding a decent enough VCR, which is probably only $20 for that. But so that would solve the issue. Bad Reality said that a good suggestion, which was going to be the other thing I was going to mention, is that you could do dual output from any console that has both a multi-out port and an RF port. So if you were really just looking to do, one thing at a time, just to do a demo or some kind of art installation, there's a lot of those around Brooklyn, CRT installations of things. You could just take like your Super Nintendo RF setup, or RGB setup, just plug in the RF adapter into the Super Nintendo, go right into the TV, and each side will work independently of each other. So both of those would be good solutions. I like the idea of, I've always wanted to build a CRT wall. I talked to the Museum of the Moving Image before they stopped returning our calls. They actually had Cruz and I go over there to repair some arcade machines, then stopped talking to us. So I hope they're proud of getting their free work out of us. But sidetrack. Point being, I pitched an idea to them of a small exhibit of a bunch of different CRTs that showed one source in different signals. And I thought that was an amazing visual representation of how CRT technology evolved and then how we evolved all the way up to 4K. I don't think they understood what I was talking about. But I think that's an awesome idea, and maybe just do a little bit of research on which Extron processing devices can go between RGB, composite, and everything else. Because I do remember seeing them, but I think they were a couple $100. Cameron McCown asked a question, and I'm going to try my best to not go off on a rant on this one. but I swear that every word out of my mouth is about to be 100% factual. Cameron asked, he was reading through the Terra Onion Twitter account, and noticed that they now claim to have audio and video issues fixed. Has anyone been able to confirm this? So here's the tweet from June of 2018. Apparently, Terra Onion, who at this point Alex was posting under their Twitter account, said there's a lot of misinformation about the SSD S3 from people that don't own one, who keep hammering about an issue without a clue. There was an RGB noise issue. We fixed it in February with a new board revision. Lie. What happened was some people's setups were completely unusable. It wasn't a noise issue. It didn't work. They fixed that, and it still was flawed. It still was just a shitty RGB signal. Next, there was an audio buzzing issue. It has been fixed as well. Also lie. There was one really huge mistake about missing a component, and that was fixed. But that was correcting a huge mistake that they made that lowered the buzzing. It didn't fix the audio signal. So how can I prove to you that these are lies? This was June 2018, and now in November, Terra Onion's working on fixing both of those problems that supposedly don't exist. They're integrating Firebrand X's audio board into it, and they're integrating Voltar's video board, fixing the problems that they're saying. Alex right here says in June of 2018 that problems that didn't exist. So there's a lot of stories like this, a lot. And every time I talk about it, so many people are like, oh, I'm tired of hearing this. Oh, you're just making a big deal. And it's really mind-blowing to me that people blow a lot of this stuff off. And now, I don't know how I feel totally about this, but now Todd from Todd's Nerd Cave is officially working for them and officially in charge of their PR. So from now on, from late November, any tweet you see from Terra Onion is coming from Todd. And when I first heard that, I was floored that somebody with a good reputation would put their name next to Terra Onions, a bunch of known liars. But he assured me that things are going to change. And I believe 100% that Todd's intentions are genuine and that he's going to try his best. But the bottom line is Alex still owns the company. So if Alex one day just takes the Twitter account back and starts going again, everything Todd is trying to do would be undone. And I just, if we can go into long details about everything Terra Onion did and everything Alex did, but the two things that really stand out a lot, besides blatant lies like that, and of course my favorite quote, quality can't be measured, so we're not going to bother fixing it. I'll put that up in this too. I'll superimpose that tweet just to prove that he actually said that. But the two things that I want everybody to remember before you just blow off this thing is that when Darksoft released his ROM cart, a buddy of mine, Beast, put up footage of testing it. Alex stole that footage, cut out everything that was wrong with it, and made it into one YouTube video under a different account, basically like, look at all the problems with Darksoft's cart. All right, so the video itself, dick move. Somebody might call that creative marketing, whatever. But here's the thing that you need to remember. I just emailed Alex, because at the time we had no issues whatsoever. I just said, hey man, was this really you? I'm kind of surprised you've been nice to me. I didn't picture you as somebody that would steal footage. I got a 2.5-page response that basically said that I'm a piece of shit because I'm a Darksoft supporter. First and foremost, fuck all of these man-child rivalries. I have nothing to do with them. I don't want anything to do with them. And then he said that it doesn't matter that he stole the footage because Beast recorded the footage from ROMs. ROMs are stolen. Therefore, he was allowed to take that footage from Twitch and use it for himself. So maybe some people might not understand the severity of that, but I guarantee you every Twitch streamer listening to this just had their jaw hit the floor. Because that's insane. The second thing, something that happened to me, I had their AES version of the NeoSD, which I loved, by the way. I thought it was perfect. I didn't mind the load times at all. I ended up wanting to buy the MVS version because I got that stand-up cab. So I sold mine to somebody else and was planning on ordering the MVS pretty much as soon as the money came in. In order to sell a NeoSD, you either have to give somebody your login information so that they could log in and get the custom firmware, or you need to email TerraOnion and have them transfer whatever device you own into the new person's name. Alex then publicly talked about that and tried to shame me for selling the ROM card. So the ironic thing was I really was going to buy in his MVS version, and then the whole thing happened with my job and I didn't. But can you just think about that for a moment? Exposing customer data publicly like that. Yeah, there's a million scenarios I could bring up on how that could be incredibly damaging to somebody, how that could be a clue leading to something else or whatever. Like, all employers check social media now, right? So what if I was going for a job and there's a whole thread with me in it about why did I sell it? Oh, I've been having medical issues, so I had to pay for whatever. And whatever employer sees that and goes, oh, this guy's got tons of medical issues, he's selling his stuff, I'm not hiring him, and then I don't get a job. That stuff happens all the time these days. And anybody that thinks I'm tinfoil hat exaggerating, I'll never be able to convince you. In fact, if that example in that story wasn't enough to explain how terrifying it is when customer data gets just blatantly exposed like that, if I can't convince you how dangerous that is, no one can, because that to me, I could not believe that the owner of a company would expose customer info like that. Ironically enough, that I really was just selling it to get their other product. So stay far away from TerraOnion. Buy all of their products if you need to buy them. If you can't find any alternative, buy it from any of their licensed resellers. If you need to get firmware updates, use like a dummy email account, like start SSDS3 12345@gmail.com. Do it from that, and if you ever need to sell it, give away that email address with it or something. It's really scary how everybody has just blown off everything Alex did. It's so strange to me that Todd is risking his reputation to try and help, and it's really upsetting when people just accuse me of well, you're just blown out of proportions because you have a rivalry with them. Oh, you're just a Darksoft supporter. Oh, fuck all of you people. I'm just a person who liked a product, wanted to buy their other one, and then stood up for my friend when his footage got stolen, and now I'm the enemy. So I don't understand why anybody would feel safe buying from them or want to support them. So good luck to you, Cameron, if you want to buy an SSDS3. The sad thing is, at the moment, it is the end-all, be-all, greatest solution if you have a super graphics. You could buy one of those, do FBX's bypass, do Voltar's bypass, stick that thing on the back, and to be honest, it's about $1,000 total. Find yourself a super graphics, do the SSDS3 with all the mods, do a full cap replacement, do the jail bar mod, do the plastic cut so it doesn't scratch the trace on the motherboard. So for around $1,000, you could have like the perfect super graphics TurboGrafx 16 setup. So it's sad that their company is run by such a psycho. And every single word that I said in this is provable by emails, timestamps. None of this, other than I think the customer data thing is bad. Everything that I said is 100% provable. So good luck to anybody who thinks it's safe buying from them. Try to buy from Stone Age Gamer. Let's hope Todd turns them around. But I've seen this before in like companies, business, not the retro gaming world. It's not a matter of if Alex will ever freak out and take control of his social media and in the customer relations again. It's not if, it's when. It will happen again, and somebody else is going to get screwed. And hopefully, it's not somebody like me that doesn't give a shit and didn't run into trouble when customer data was exposed. Hopefully, it's not somebody that could be hurt by something like that. Frank Aguayo had an awesome question. He said, has anyone looked into how retro games were tested during development? Cable connections, TV quality, any rear projection, stuff like that. So I would love to know the answer to that question myself, but what I do know is I've seen a lot of videos, whether it's promotional material, documentary, or whatever else, where all of the game testers, so not the developers, but the people that were just playing games looking for bugs, had basic setups. Consumer grade tube TVs with composite video or RF, and I didn't notice anybody testing anything crazier than that. Now, this was all documentaries from U.S. companies, so I would like to know the answer to that too. How did people in Europe test? Was it with RGB SCART into a CRT? Did developers work on both RGB and other options? Did they take a look at a bunch of TVs next to each other? You know, so how does RF look? How does composite? How does RGB look? I think I would. In fact, if the answer is interesting enough, maybe I'll do a whole video based on that. But great question, Frank. I've been wondering that for a while and keep forgetting to ask. So if anybody knows, or even if you know where I might be able to find info, please chime in on the Patreon page down below, because I would really love to know how all this stuff worked and how developers approached it. I would think that art designers probably took the time to look, for at least bigger budget games, probably took the time to look at higher end consumer grade CRTs with all of the inputs. And then from there on, it was just whatever the cheapest thing they could find for testers. That's my guess, but I'd love to know for sure. Mark Pitos asked if my UMK3 board has a hard gold JAMMA connector. No, it has a silver JAMMA connector. Let's see if I can get that in view. Sorry. Yeah, silver on both sides. And I believe this one was called the Wolf board. I don't know too much about these, but I believe this was the board that if you swap out every one of these RAM chips, that you could convert it between any of the boards that used that same layout. So I believe there's NBA Showtime, and then I think a wrestling game. I believe that's it. So yeah, the rest of your question on do we have to worry about hard gold or silver going into something like the HAS, do we have to worry about mixing metal? Is there going to be things that we need to worry about in the future? That's a good question, and I think that's something I'd like to ask Renee about on the next Retro Roundtable, which I believe is going to be next Monday, or next Wednesday the 28th. Let me check that real quick. Yeah, next Wednesday the 28th. So if you happen to be available in the time that we shoot those, jump in live. I'll try my best to remember to ask, but if not, you could listen to that afterwards, because I could only guess, whereas I think Renee would actually know the answer. So good question, and yeah, and I've been wanting to check my board, so that just gave me another excuse to take it out and look it over. So thanks, Mark. Ludo had an RGB cable that worked fine on a PAL Dreamcast, but not on Japanese Dreamcast, on 3 different ones. He said he opened up the cable on both ends and everything looks wired properly. And he's also ruled out SCART pin 8 and 16 as he tried it on both an RGB modded TV and a PVM. I have never heard of PAL specific Dreamcast cables before. I could be wrong. I don't know a lot about PAL consoles, but I do know that the Toro isn't region specific. That could be used on everything. So I would ask where you got the Dreamcast cable. Was it just a cheap eBay seller, one of those $4 cables, or is it? You didn't say it was one of the boxes, so I'm assuming it was just a cable. So yeah, I'd really like to know where you got it and if the seller has had problems with that before, because it should just work on all. I'll double check with HD Retrovision, because I know they're making a Dreamcast cable. But I'm 99.9% sure it's not region specific. It should just work. So I would, I would probably try to get a better quality Dreamcast cable, and that might be the solution to all the problems. Michael said he has a TurboGrafx 16 and previously used a DB graphics booster, but picked up an SSD S3. Now he wants to upgrade the video quality, so he's wondering whether to put Voltar's internal RGB mod in the console itself, or to do the RGB bypass on the SSD S3. So this is kind of a tricky question, because if you do the bypass on the inside, technically the closer you get to that initial video signal with the amp, the better. But I've seen DB Graphics Booster plugged into a TurboGrafx and get flawless output, provided you do the cap replacement and the jail bar fix on the TurboGrafx. I've seen it be the identical quality as an internal mod. So right there, that's kind of a gamble. The other thing that you might want to think about, and please, I think Firebrand X listens to these, so please correct me if I'm wrong, FBX, but I think that in order to get audio from the CD optical drive emulation, you need to use the audio output of the SSD-S3. So if you were planning on using one cable for everything, not a custom cable, not a solution where you could have one audio input, one video input, then you might just want to do the SSD-S3 video update as well as Firebrand X's audio board. And that way, just one cable, it should be a perfect output. There are some TurboGrafx and Core Graphics units that have had issues, but for the most part, you should be fine with that. However, if you think you might ever upgrade to a different solution, there is the Upper Graphics, which is ridiculously expensive. But I mean, if you ever have thoughts of keeping this console, but upgrading the plug-and-play solution in the back, like maybe it's your childhood console, sentimental, I would consider putting the RGB mod on the inside, just because that will never change. No matter what, you're going to have a great RGB output signal. Whatever plugs in the back just works, and go from there. So this one I would really let ease of use and longevity of the console make the decision for you. So if you just have a bunch of stuff into a G-SCART and you don't want to mess with a custom cable or anything like that, just upgrade the SSD-S3. It should be a great solution. But if not, then do the mod on the inside. Hope that one made sense. I know it was a little confusing. Riot Gear Zach had an interesting question. At the end of the day, after playing my retro games in nearly every possible way I have, what's your favorite way to play? Big CRT, big OLED with an upscaler, or would the BVM be my preferred choice? So if you're talking about playing, if you're talking about a day where I could actually clear my head, pretend that I don't have a million things to do, and just sit and play a game, no doubt my D32. Just absolutely no doubt. The only exception would be light gun games. So it is my personal opinion that I want the biggest screen possible while playing light gun games. So if I had the choice between like a 40-inch consumer-grade TV that looks good, not crappy. Maybe it's S-Video only. Hopefully it's at least component. Maybe it's RGB modded, whatever. If I had a lower quality 40-inch CRT for light gun games, or even the very few Sega 3D or Nintendo 3D games that work well, I would choose the bigger CRT any day of the week for 3D or light gun games. For my favorites like Super Metroid, original Zelda, any of that stuff, Sony BVM D32, no doubt, that absolutely is my favorite way to play. And I guess the only other exceptions to that would be playing Duck Hunt on my 65-inch OLED's pretty freaking cool. I like that, how I could do that now. Game Boy Advance games and original Game Boy games. I think the way that you could play them on my BVM now is amazing, but there's still going to be some kind of border that you have to deal with. So I think there are maybe some situations I might rather play Game Boy Advance games through like the Woozle adapter on my flat screen. But little situations like that. Testing, definitely a flat screen, just because my flat screen is replaceable. It's expensive. I hope I don't have to replace it, but it is replaceable, whereas my D32 isn't. So yeah, those are my list of exceptions. But the bottom line is, for everything that's not a light gun game, gaming on the best quality Sony BVM, and then light gun games is the biggest TV you could find. But yeah, that's a great question, and I think the reason is when you look at that BVM, it's not just the quality that you get; it's also the side effects of a CRT itself. So the scan lines, don't forget, you're looking through a pane of glass with empty space behind it. So those scan lines aren't black lines drawn across the screen. It's, information is gone there. So it gives a depth, a feeling of depth to the games when you play them that solid scan lines on a flat screen, in my opinion, doesn't really pull off. And there's also the vertical scan lines as well. Or depending on Shadow Mask or Aperture Girl, maybe you see squares instead of lines, well, whatever. But point being is there's a look that at the moment cannot be emulated on a flat screen TV. It's possible that with maybe a 4K version of like the OSSC, and more likely an 8K scaler. So 10 years from now, when we're still talking about this stuff, it is possible to try and recreate the experience and get very, very close. It would need algorithms to draw things in the same way that it would be drawn on a CRT. You'd need a zero lag flat screen. So there might be some day that I prefer a 70-inch 8K TV over all of these other solutions. But at the moment, it's really just because the look and feel of the game is definitely still different on a really high-end CRT than on flat screens. Porkchop Express 85 had a question about Dan Kuntz Citrus 3000 PSI's SCART head with RGB termination. He said he found the board on OSH Park, but he doesn't see the resistor values. So if it's the one I'm thinking of, if it's just for you making your own cables and instead of soldering wires directly to the pins in the SCART head, you want to use his board, the reason there's no values is because it's going to be a little bit different for whatever console that you're using. For example, on an NTSC Super Nintendo, I don't think you need resistors at all. I'm pretty sure you just need 220 microfarad capacitors. Whereas on a Sega Genesis, you would need 75 ohm resistors on RGB and then 220 microfarad capacitor after that. Also, it's not going to kill your console if you have resistors in the SCART head, but it would be better to have them in the console side of the cable when you make them. So I'm assuming that's why there's no BOM listed, and that's why you're not finding those, is because you'll have to tailor it exactly to each console. I have the C-Sync information up on my site now, but I haven't gotten around to making the actual values for each cable. That's something that's definitely going to be up at some point because, while I would always recommend that people go to a source where you can get a really good pre-built cable, because most people are not going to be able to do as good as a company that's been working on this for a long time. There are definitely situations where you would want to build your own cable. Maybe it's like I just talked about with the SSDS3. Maybe Michael would want to use this to build his own cable, so audio is pulled from the SSDS3 and video is pulled from the TurboGrafx. So there's many situations why you would want to make your own. And I'm going to try to get all that info up on the site, but I'm pretty sure that's the answer to your question, is because you need to figure out what exactly you're using. Or if you're just using a pass-through cable, just jump the resistors together, and that way you don't actually need one. Well, that's it for this week's Q&A. Sorry for the one long rant. I'm going to try not to do that anymore. I do get really upset when people blow off everything about that one company. But for any newcomers, please don't worry. This isn't a weekly rant. Everything else is representative of what you would normally find on these Q&As. And if you're new to the channel, please remember that you want to post any questions at all on the Patreon page that you found this video. I disable the comments on YouTube because this really is a Patreon-only experience that I then release to the public about a month later, just because, So any questions at all about anything, post on the Patreon page of this video. I don't get around to checking the ones from the weeks before because I just wouldn't have time to sift through. So anything at all, even if it's a question regarding a different week, post on this week's, this number 31 page, and I'll talk about it next week. So thanks to everybody for participating. Thank you all for being amazing Patreon supporters. This channel couldn't happen without you, so I'm always super appreciative, and I really enjoy doing these Q&As. So see you next time.